war with Iran was supposed to change the equation, but before the bombs fall, before presidents ever make decisions about war and peace, and before negotiators ever sit across from one another, there is intelligence. What does someone who spent decades trying to understand Iran from inside the CIA see happening next? Our guest today is Mark Fowler, a decorated former CIA case officer, Farsi speaker, and one of the most experienced Iran operations officers of his generation. He spent 22 years at the CIA, rising to the number 2 position on Iran and Iraq within the agency and serving overseas as a chief of station.
That's the question, isn't it? A million Toman question. I think we're in a test of wills right now.
Then, some very familiar faces are now being put back in charge inside Iran. The unseen Supreme Leader Mojtaba Khamenei has appointed 6 senior commanders across Iran's armed forces, Revolutionary Guards and Basij, while veteran Guards commander Mohsen Rezaei has been handed one of the most powerful national security positions in the country. These aren't young commanders being elevated to build a new Islamic republic. They are veterans of the old one. So, is Mojtaba Khamenei rebuilding a command structure for the next phase of war, consolidating his own power, preparing for unrest at home, or is this simply the same old guard being given new titles? Here to debate that are Kamran Bokhari, Senior Resident Fellow at the Middle East Policy Council and a strategic forecaster, Jason Brodsky, Policy Director at United Against Nuclear Iran, and Omid Memarian. He's a Senior Iran Analyst at the think tank Dawn.
My view is that there's been an undeclared coup by the Guards.
Hossein Tayyip's stock is rising at the same time as Ali Asghar Mir Hijazi's stock is falling.
The new security arrangement, I think, reflects on their insecurity and nervousness about the domestic situation.
And finally, repression in Iran may not only be about who controls the streets, it may increasingly be about how those streets themselves are designed. Here's what we mean by this. In some of Tehran's most historic areas, the municipality is tearing up cobblestones and replacing them with asphalt. My colleague Mehdi Sepahvan investigated what's happening and the history behind the idea of designing cities with security and social control in mind.
They are creating plain sight and direct shooting range for their forces.
I'm Negar Mojtahedi, and this is Eye for Iran. Our guest today is Mark Fowler, a decorated former CIA case officer focused on Iran, serving 22 years in the CIA, rising to the number 2 position on both Iran and Iraq within the agency itself, a Middle East specialist and a veteran of the U.S. war on terror. Thank you so much, Mark, for being here. Let's begin with you before we get into the bigger picture on Iran. What does a CIA case officer, a specialist on Iran, actually do? What does that mean? And I've read on your Substack that you wrote, espionage is not just about lies, it's more about the truth. Tell us what you mean by that, specifically when it came to your work on Iran.
Salam, Negar. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be here. I'll address the last thing first in terms of the truth. Being a case officer is an Iran specialist. That's what I was. A case officer is an operations officer. We are the individuals, men and women, who recruit spies and steal secrets. That's exactly what we do. And we did this, and I did this with Iran. In terms of the truth, I wrote that. It's part of sort of my mantra on what intelligence is actually about. It's a very complicated profession, if you will, simply because you're dealing with human beings. So everybody's different, cultures are different, but people are people. And so what I meant by that was, in many ways, people think it's all about lies. You're manipulating people and all this, and everybody's greedy, and why are they doing this? I found in my years of doing this, decades, a lot of that was spent working on Iran, working with Iranians who were working against this regime. And the most important thing was the truth. Getting to the truth could be hard for us and for them, frankly, because it's a question of trust and betrayal. We talked about that. That's the thing, because there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of lack of trust that a lot of Iranians bring because of what they see inside with the regime, the culture that's been built over the last decades. So I always found what I tried to do was to be as truthful as I possibly could when I was working with Iranians who were in a very dangerous situation. They were trying to make their country better. They were sharing information they shouldn't be, and some of these people had tremendously secret information, if you will. But what I always found was the truth was the best way to make the relationship work, because it is a relationship that's very personal when you're talking two people face to face, knee to knee, if you will, talking about these things. So I always tried to get to the truth as quickly as I could. It usually took a while because they were very suspicious, and our reputation exceeds us in terms of, who we are and what we're like. Are we the devil? They kind of looked at us and said, "Oh my goodness, you don't have horns." The first time they met a CIA officer. So that's kind of what I meant by that. In terms of the truth is the most important thing. And usually after a while, almost in every case, they would come to appreciate that. And I heard it many times. He says, I didn't believe you at first, but I've come to understand that you tell the truth. When you tell me something, it's the truth. And I they appreciate that almost more than anything.
And how did you gain access to these individuals? I assume that these people were most likely inside of Iran?
Yes. I mean, there's a variety of ways to do that. Obviously, there's diplomatic establishments all over the world, and in those establishments, there's diplomats, there's intelligence officers, Revolutionary Guards, et cetera, et cetera. In some cases, people traveling in terms of their jobs or frankly, on vacation or pilgrimage. And, there are certain places that Iranians can go for a Shia pilgrimage. And so in some cases, it was simply developing a relationship with them while they were assigned outside. In other cases, it was them offering up. We call them volunteers or walk-ins. These are people who literally walk in and offer their services. And that happens quite frequently. It's a well-known thing. I'm not giving away anything that the counterintelligence people inside Iran don't know. So in many cases, because we're not inside Iran in terms of, when I say we, there's no diplomatic facilities inside Iran. So the presence of Americans is extremely limited. So in many cases, it's Iranians who are outside who actually offer themselves up, or we're aware they're outside, whether it's on business or on a diplomatic assignment or a military assignment, temporary assignment. And we put ourselves in front of them, if you will. Sometimes they put themselves in front of us. So it depends on the situation. That's what we always say in the intelligence world. It depends, and everything depends on the situation. It's never one way. There's never one way to do it. And as I said before, we deal with people. So it's a very complex situation in terms of human emotions, human fears, human hopes, etc.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and especially with the challenges that come with a country like Iran, where there are no diplomatic relations and presence of Americans, as you said. Thank you for that insight. How crucial is intel when it comes to shaping policy and even outcome? And if we look at some of the more recent examples, we've got reports that President Donald Trump actually switched planes based on Israeli and not American intel. And some can even argue that the war with Iran was based on Israeli intelligence that helped to make Trump make that final call in some cases.
Right. Well, intelligence is critical in a regarding a country that is not friendly with the United States and frankly not friendly with too many other countries outside of Iran.
Or their own people.
Exactly. Not friendly with their own people who are inside Iran, for that matter. Intelligence is critical. It has its limitations just because usually intelligence is usually used as the final piece, the last mile, if you would. It's hard. And so there's open source information. We usually have embassy reporting, just in terms of what's going on. But obviously, the world has changed a lot since I started. We used to collect newspapers and literally just like breadbasket issues, we call it. What's the cost of bread? Literally things like that, because it matters. Now we can find those things on the internet, although the internet, as you well know, is controlled. And at this point, I think I'm not sure if it's on or off right now at this minute, but the regime, the Islamic regime, controls the internet. But still, there's a lot of information out there. So the intelligence reporting itself, there's many different types. There's signals intelligence, of course. There's what I call human intelligence, which is what I used to do. And it's critical. But it's usually the last piece. It's the piece that provides either the context or it provides the yes, that's correct, or no, that's not correct. So in terms of when we lack the full breadth of intelligence on a location like Iran, it's very tricky. It was the same thing with Iraq, frankly. It's very difficult. We call them a denied area. And it's denied because we're either not there, but it's also extremely security difficult in terms of Moscow is also a denied area, just because of the counterintelligence atmosphere, and Iran is the same way. So it makes it very difficult, but it's critical. It provides tremendous insight on plans and intentions. What are they actually thinking about at the highest levels? Whether it's Supreme Leader or people in the Supreme National Security Council, or within the IRGC, or within the Ministry of Intelligence. That's where we want to get. That's the information we want to gather to provide insights. And it's very difficult to do because, you could look at it as looking through a straw, if you will. It gives you a specific thing. And when you get the right person in the right location, that straw is critical because it tells you what's actually going on, the context. Is it propaganda, tablighat, for that matter, things like that. So are they just telling us this because that's what they want us to hear? So the information on the plane and everything, we share intelligence with our partners, and in some cases, there's already questions of whether how much confidence we had in that. But sometimes with an abundance of caution, you don't take a chance and you make a move. And also, it's up to the policymaker, frankly, whether they heed the intelligence and what part of the intelligence they make, because they make policy. We don't make policy in the intelligence community, not all. We inform the policymaker. It's up to them to actually make policy, to make the decision. And in this decision, of course, President Trump made the decision to go to war. And it appears that Israeli intelligence was a major factor in that, for better or worse.
How big a role does U.S. intelligence have right now under the Trump administration? Because things are definitely done, you could say, differently.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm not inside now at this point. It appears that
you still have connections, I assume, people that your former associates.
It appears that I think in this administration they're less mindful of the value of intelligence. I mean, different presidents are like that. Frankly, it's just we've had presidents in the past where the CIA director or the intelligence community had less influence for whatever reason. How much confidence they have, whether they've had a bad experience in the past. And I think we're kind of seeing that right now a little bit. So I think it's pretty clear, and I've written on this in my Substack, that the president didn't really heed U.S. intelligence, I think, the way he should have. He paid more attention to the Israeli intelligence. That's what at least the reporting said. So what he did, in my personal view, and I've stated this, he went forward with a war he didn't really understand. He was not thoroughly prepared. The military was. They're always prepared. But the strategy and the policy that accompanied it, he wasn't thoroughly prepared. And he went into this without thinking through or really understanding the opponent, the Iranian people, or the Islamic regime is the opponent. However, on the other hand, as you well know, the Iranian regime has been preparing for just such this scenario for several generations now. So we find ourselves in a difficult situation, to say the least.
And so why is that? Why do you suppose the president wouldn't heed to the advice of intelligence?
Well, I mean, that's inside his head, and frankly, it's hard to say. I think intelligence is kind of it's not like on TV where they come in, they say, this is what it is. It's like this. It's usually indicators. It's like, we assess. This is what the analysts use. I'm not an analyst. I was an operations officer. So we have to make harder decisions, not harder. That's the wrong term. We have to deal with people, so we have to make decisions all the time. The analysts go in when they've done their final analysis, and they brief it all the way up to the president. We have the PDB, the Presidential Daily Brief, and the way they present this usually, I'm speaking for them right now, is usually we assess this with high confidence, low confidence, medium confidence. It's like we saw the reference to the Israeli intelligence. Low confidence or medium. I can't remember exactly what it was, but it wasn't high. So it's a little fuzzy. And so I think I have to assume, and I hate to assume, but I will a little bit here, that the president finds that difficult or finds that not very satisfying, because it's not like we can tell them, they have 6 tanks here. We can tell they got, planes here. They have missile launchers here. That's tactical intelligence. When you get into strategic intelligence, where it's plans and intentions, what is the supreme leader thinking? What is Vahidi thinking? The chief of the IRGC. What is Mohsen Rezaei, the new chair on the National Security Council? What is he thinking? That's really hard to get to. In some cases, you can get some indicators, but usually it's not like definitive. This is what it is. It's this. This is what they're going to do. It's a little fuzzier. It's grayer. It's giving them information to work with to help them make their decision. It doesn't make their decision for them, and I think he doesn't really appreciate that. That's what I gather.
So the analysts essentially interpret what you folks were doing out in the field, and then would give certain suggestions that were either, as you said, not definitive.
Essentially, yes. Interpret is probably, yes. I mean, they are interpreting, they are assessing. It's called all source intelligence. By the time it gets to the president, and certainly all senior policymakers within the U.S. government, it's been combed through very closely. It's probably including signals, human intelligence, overhead pictures, things like that. This is all put together into a very tight package, and this is presented in writing. Some people want to see it in a report, and that's all they want. And then a briefer is there to answer questions if they want that. If they have any questions, they may not, because it may be more definitive, like there's 6 tanks here, there's 3, missile launchers here. That's a little different. But then there's, what is the supreme leader thinking, or what is the who's in charge in Tehran right now? And, that can be a back and forth, and they give their best assessment based on the intelligence they have. And in some cases, maybe we don't know that, Mr. President. We think it's this, but it's not clear. And they might give questions back. You might say, well, can we look further into this? And they'll say, yes, sir. They'll write it down. They'll go back and they'll come back to him with answers. So it's a give and take kind of thing. It's a kind of a unique relationship, if you will, particularly at the highest levels.
So now, based on everything you've just said and your role and experience with Iran that you've just established, how did we get to where we are right now? I mean, I was reading in your Substack, you had this incredible metaphor of, the bare knuckle fight. Tell us about that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, the bare knuckle fight is a metaphor, obviously. And basically, it's essentially there's the champion and the challenger. The champion is the U.S. superpower, et cetera. The challenger was Iran, if you will. And a lot of times what they would do, these were very famous, particularly in the U.K. and in 1800s, et cetera. But they would the challenger would come and challenge the champion, who was usually won all the time. But the deal was either if you're standing at the end of 1 round, 2 rounds, 3 rounds, I said 3 rounds, whatever. If you're standing, you win a prize. You win the purse, if you will, and you also win the acclaim of saying I stood up to what's his name, who's the champion for 3 rounds. Essentially, that's what's happened here. We've bloodied and bruised the Iranian regime. There's no question about that militarily. They are very much on their back heels in terms of, the Navy's pretty much gone. And some of the things that we're hearing out of Washington are actually factually very true. The Navy's pretty much gone. The Air Force is either gone or just grounded. Of course, there's still missiles. There's still drones, which is a whole nother issue. So they are bruised and bloodied, if you will. But it's the end of the 3rd round. The bell has gone off, and Iran is still standing. So they have won the prize. They won that challenge prize. That's the bare knuckle piece of it. They won that challenge. They didn't have to win. They simply had to survive and be standing at the end of the third round. And that's kind of where we are right now.
So winning is just a different, I guess, calculus on both sides, their version of what it means to win.
Well, yeah, exactly. And I mean, I certainly didn't come up with this, but it's surviving is winning for the Iranian regime right now. Of course, the initial decapitation strike against the leadership, but we saw a fairly smooth succession, new supreme leader, but also throughout the IRGC and the other positions within the government, they were filled by the deputy or the person below that, depending on who was left. So they've managed to sort of survive. And I'm not going to say they're thriving. I think there's a lot of factionalism going on inside, and I think they're sort of gathering around the flagpole, if you will, is how we say it here. And it's like, because there's an outside threat. So they're kind of, they're looking at the outside threat, the regime, whoever's there. I'm not sure who's in charge. And I'm not sure it's the supreme leader, really, myself. I think that might be a bit of an avatar, if you will, for the people
who haven't even seen him or heard him.
Well, exactly. I mean, that's very unusual. I mean, even if he's very badly hurt, I assume he's alive, but I'm not even going to assume that. But the people would want to see him. His supporters would want to see him, that he survived this and everything. And it's been months now. So that's a whole nother issue. But I'm not so sure that he's in charge at all. I think that people are speaking in his name. And I think there's a lot of factionalism going on behind the scenes in terms of, it's kind of like who's going to be next on the throne, if you will. And I'm not sure at all that it's going to be Mojtaba or even a supreme leader. Who knows whether that position is going to survive? I don't know. And it's brought them to this look where we are right now, which is war with the United States and Israel because of the ideology involved and all that. So.
Yeah, and as you said, these types of individuals, everybody wants to become king at the end of the day. So we want to talk about how we got here. Let's get into the MOU, which didn't last long, and that was after Iran fired at vessels in the Strait of Hormuz. So in brief, we had a 60-day U.S.-Iran interim framework, temporary sanctions relief on Iranian oil and petrochemical sales. Oil exports could resume, which was a huge one, restoring a major source of revenue for the Islamic Republic. Commercial shipping, Hormuz reopened, temporary economic breathing room for Tehran. A 60-day window was established for negotiations between the U.S. and Iran. And, Iran was supposed to be committed to nuclear negotiations. It was very vague. It was very much advantageous or favored towards Iran, I could say.
Exactly. Exactly.
And by Iran breaking and thereby letting go of the MOU that enriched them and was, as we just mentioned, in favor of them, what did they have to gain by doing that? What did the Islamic Republic have to gain by giving up so much? What did the U.S. have by offering an MOU that by all means gave Iran the advantage? What did they gain by giving Iran this and even offering this in the first place? It's a very simple question, but Mark, why?
Yeah, it's a simple question, but a really complex answer. I think the Iranians probably looked at the Iranian negotiating team are very professional. IRGC has been involved in these things for a long time. Our side, not so much. And I hate to say this. It literally pains me to say that I think the people on our side of the table are not the right people to be doing this. They're, the son-in-law and the buddy, the real estate buddy of the president, he trusts them, I guess, which is okay to some degree, but I think they're out of their league for sure. In terms of why they accept it, for Iran, the vagueness and the advantageous nature of the terms, which are frankly, in my mind, inexplicable. I do not understand why the U.S. would have essentially awarded them this and why the president would have signed it. But this to them was a great step forward. It was giving them certain things that they wanted, sanctions, money, moving oil, certain things like that. But moving in the issue of, it didn't address the missile program. It didn't really address nuclear, except we're going to talk about it. And how long we've been talking about the nuclear program?
Talk of talks.
Exactly. Talk of talks. We didn't talk about the proxy network, which is tremendously important. Hezbollah,
and they included Lebanon in there. They got what they wanted by involving Lebanon into the equation.
Exactly. And then, of course, that means Hezbollah. That's who that's their primary proxy, and the one they built up for decades now. And I would be willing to bet that virtually every mid to level, senior level IRGC officer has probably spent time in Lebanon working with Hezbollah. This is personal as well as just strategic.
They're still
security issues. Yeah, exactly. So I think the Iranians, if I had to guess, and I am guessing, I'm speculating, they were probably giddy about the terms that they actually got as an interim. And it was a way, as a ceasefire, of course, to stop being bombed, if you will. And so for them, it was a huge win because it was so vague. It allowed the vagueness of the language allowed them to interpret specifically or set the Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz, in terms of who could get through, when could they get through, and the ultimate administration of the Strait of Hormuz was actually left open.
Why did they break it? Why did they jeopardize it then?
I think that's where the factionalism comes in terms of their testing. Also, frankly, the fact that the U.S. side was willing to sign this, and I'm sure they were looking at this, there must be a trick here because this is advantageous enough to us. The only thing it gave the U.S. was, some kind of perhaps sort of a maybe roadmap to opening the Strait of Hormuz. But of course, we saw where that went. But
did nobody read this? How did this get through? Like, is there not? What kind of oversight do you have?
I mean, normally this thing would have been administered through the National Security Council, but that doesn't really exist right now, unfortunately, under this administration. They've kind of like scattered it. And so I don't know if it went straight from Witkoff and Kushner, the two prime negotiators, or the Vice President Vance, directly to President's desk. I have no idea, but he probably didn't read it. I don't know how he could have because he signed it, but I think it was personally, I think it was a mistake. And we've seen, and I wrote on this immediately. I said, this guarantees we're going to end up back where we were before, which of course is where we are, simply because of the terms and everything. But in terms of why they did that,
maybe what they wanted?
The Iranians?
No,
the Iranians?
Americans.
I think you're giving too much credit there. No, the administration wants a ceasefire. There's no question. I think it's, and we're seeing that right now in terms of where the president has landed on sort of like, okay, it's all blockade. It's no more bombs. We're simply going to squeeze economically, which is frankly probably the only way forward. But it's just a question of who cries uncle first. Who says I give? Iran is suffering right now. There's no question about that. Exactly how much and everything, people are probably studying that now. I guarantee you the analysts throughout the intelligence community, the 18 different organizations, they're all looking at this very, very hard to figure out when's the breaking point. But there's no one thing. It's not like, when we reach this level of inflation or whatever, that's the end. It's up to the regime. And of course, I'm pretty sure the regime is less accountable to the people of Iran than the president is to the people of America. Certainly, it's obviously they suffering of the people is, for as far as the regime is concerned. Well, that's part of the process. It's the Shaitana Bazorg is fighting with us, and so we all have to suffer together. Of course, I guarantee you, the people at the top, the IRGC and the other leadership and whatever, the clerics, they're not suffering like the people in the streets. I guarantee you they're not. And it's just a question of when, and they're more than happy to allow people to suffer, because the more the Iranian people suffer, the more they sort of like look to blame somebody, hopefully not the regime. They can blame the U.S. for that. So it's complex, but I think in terms of why they would break the ceasefire and everything, I think a lot of that probably has to do with the factionalism inside. There are different groups. Who knows what the command and control is? It is dispersed. As we know, they call it the mosaic defense, which is pretty good, and it seems to have worked fairly well. But of course, all it takes is a phone call or whatever, a person traveling from Tehran to wherever, Bandar Abbas or somebody else, that says, okay, we want you to hit a ship, because we don't want this. We want to disrupt this whole thing, because I think in the end, the Iranians are interpreting the signing of the MOU, and in each of the cyclical negotiations, break it, hit them. Negotiations, break it, hit all these, as a sign, frankly, and again, I hate to say this too, desperation on the part of the administration. So every time they ratcheted it up, They knew they were going to get hit, but they had decided they could handle that. It wasn't going to bring down the regime.
It was worth it for them then, is what you're saying.
Yes, it was worth it. It was they were taunting, and I wrote about this too. Another one, sorry, in the counting coup, I call it. And I don't know, I don't want to get too esoteric here, but basically, American Indians used to do this thing they call counting coup, which is fighting. They're in a war, and they would run up to an opponent, an enemy, and they would literally touch them. They wouldn't kill them or anything. They would touch them, counting coup, and then get away. I think that's a bit that's what I wrote about. The Iranians are doing this, and what that does is it shows the enemy, I'm not afraid of you, and I'm so brave that I can come up and do this. And frankly, it also humiliates them. And I think that's part of what we're seeing here. The regime is intent on humiliating the administration in general, because United States, the Shaitan Bazorg, like I said, but also the president, frankly. So that's a part of the calculus here, and they've decided that they can withstand the military response, because they've seen what we have at this point, and unless we see something different, I don't see it changing the equation.
So if you don't see the equation changing, just to conclude, Mark, how would you characterize the state of, whatever you want to call this as, not peace, not war, something in between, sometimes strikes? What does that mean at the end of the day?
Well, that's the question, isn't it? A million Toman question. I think we're basically we're in a test of wills right now. And my personal belief is what we need to do is essentially there's no other option than what we're doing right now. This is probably where we are. I just don't know who's going to blink first. You know how that works. But I think what we need to do is, and I've heard this in other places. I have written on this. I started to write about this particular issue in May on my Substack. We need to force or allow the regime to have to face the internal issues that Iran is facing right now. The economy was collapsing, hyperinflation, of course, the ecological. They're literally running out of water. And of course, the people of Iran. We saw that in January. There were millions of people in the street. And it wasn't simply, we love America, we want this. They were upset by what was happening under the governorship of this regime in terms of all these issues. So I think what we need to do is, the blockade's fine. I don't know what's going to happen in the end. No one knows, frankly. I don't know who's going to blink first. I don't know what it's going to mean in the end. I don't know what the deal is, but it's probably going to be pretty advantageous to Iran in many ways, certainly more advantageous than a lot of Americans would like after going to war. But I think what we need to do is force them to face the existential issues inside Iran that are facing the country of Iran, and that will reveal the appalling mismanagement of this regime. Same regime, seems different supreme leader, but essentially this Islamic regime forced them to face the Iranian people and themselves, frankly, as a country, in terms of, where do we go from here? And these are not just things you can even just throw money at. What do you do about water? There's no rain. There's things that they've misused water. All the other issues that are involved, we need to force them to face that. And that could bring about change more thoroughly than any military action.
Yeah, test of wills is a great way to frame it, Mark, and I completely agree. Once the threat of war recedes, the Iranian regime is going to have to face the people of Iran, and this is why they're executing people en masse. They've brought out the cranes. People are still protesting, which is quite incredible that they came out knowing the fate that they would face for doing such a thing, to be able to, again, come out with this post-war economy, which is, World War II like inflation levels. I don't think that they're going to be able to survive that, and a reckoning with themselves, an identity crisis. Are we going to have Velayat Faqih? Are we going to go as a clerical establishment? Are we more militant? There's going to be, a test between the different factions and who will come out on top here. And then we'll find out, is Mojtaba Khamenei even alive? So I think you're right that the greatest threat the Iranian regime is going to face is the people of Iran, and potentially the threat of war receding.
Right. That will force them to face their own devils, if you will. And they will force them to face what they have done over the last several decades and make them responsible, not an outside force.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much, Mark. Really appreciate your time today on Eye for Iran.
Thank you so much, Negar. It was a pleasure.
Guests today are Kamran Bokhari, a senior resident fellow at the Middle East Policy Council and strategic forecaster, Jason Brodsky, policy director at United Against Nuclear Iran, and Omid Memorian, a senior Iran analyst at the think tank Dawn. Thank you so much to you all for being here. Let's discuss the recent reshuffling of Iran's old guards for Iran's supposed new order. Iran's unseen and unheard, I should say, Supreme Leader has issued his first military decrees. Let's break it down and then we can go through each one of them and analyze. We've got Ali Abdullahi, Chief of Staff of the Armed Forces, with Kiomars Haidari as his deputy. Ahmed Vahidi, Commander-in-Chief of the Revolutionary Guards, with Mostafa Izzadi as his deputy, Ali Azmai, Commander of the Guards Navy, and Hossein Taeb, this is a very important appointment here, the feared former intelligence chief of guards, is now head of the Basij. Separately, of course, Mohsen Rezaei, the former guards commander, named Khamenei's military advisor back in March, became secretary of the Supreme National Security Council and the leader's representatives on the body. So these are all men who are very much part of the Islamic Republic establishment, specifically when it comes to the regime's repressive apparatus, securitization, militarization. They're all, older men, many of them in their 70s. So is this even really a big deal? Has anything really changed, or is it much of the same?
I think some of these appointments to show the continuity in the system and how the regime wants to repair some of the holes that have been created over the past few months. From all these appointments, I think the coming back, the return of Hossein Taeb to power is very significant and shows the priorities of the regime. Hossein Taeb is very much feared among friends and foes in Iran. He has been somebody who has been behind some of the most repressive policies of the Islamic Republic. He has gone after many opponents. He has crushed social and political movements. So he's somebody whose return shows a priority that the new Supreme Leader has, and that is to make sure that they control the crowd on the streets. They are very much nervous, concerned about people and their demands and their expectations from the regime, and they understand that even though they are dealing with the foreign threat with the U.S. and Israel from the outside, internal situation, domestic situation can explode at any moment. So they have brought somebody like Hossein Taeb not to mend with the rest of the population, not to basically bring some of the people who joined them during the war because of the nationalism that was very much in the forefront. They have brought Hossein Taeb to solidify and unify the base of the regime, the loyalists, and to basically show teeth to the rest of the public that we are here to crush any dissent and suppress any opposition basically inside the country. So I think that his appointment is very significant.
Yeah, and it's, as you mentioned, he was very much a part of what happened with the repression in 2009 with the Green Movement. He was very much an architect of the repression there. As well, it's interesting, back in 2022, Khamenei Sr. actually tossed him aside. And the reason is there was speculation that Khamenei Sr. was worried that because of the closeness between Taeb and Mojtaba Khamenei, that Mojtaba Khamenei was consolidating too much power within Iran's security establishment. You even had foes, like you mentioned in this case, Ahmadinejad, referring to him as a unbalanced person who fabricates cases against his opponents. And Taeb was also very much a failure because he was part of the intelligence apparatus when Israel was able to steal the nuclear archives in Tehran and assassinate the, the founder of Iran's nuclear program, Fakhrizadeh. So it's interesting, given the amount of Israeli penetration right now, that they would bring in somebody who's proven that he really can't do the job in that case. What do you think, Kamran, about his appointment? And also, has anything really changed? Because a lot of people say to me, well, these are all the same old faces, pretty much.
Well, thank you, Negar. It's great to be with Jason and Umid. I think one of the things that is not being talked about a whole lot is who is making these appointments. This isn't a normal situation. There is no supreme leader as far as I'm concerned, because we haven't seen anybody. Let's say Mojtaba is still alive. Okay, what is his condition? And even if he was in the best of health, how much power does he actually wield, considering that his father had lost power to the Guards as well, and to other factions. And he became sort of this balancer, this figurehead. Here's a man who was given the job after he was nearly killed. So he didn't know he got the job until he woke up from his hospital bed. I'm speculating here. There are speculations out there that he's probably in and out of a coma. We don't really know. So, but the point is, who is making these appointments? My view is that there's been an undeclared coup by the Guards. And these appointments are led by a small clique. And here I will distinguish between those who still wear the uniform and those who, take it out of the closet and wear it when it's necessary, like Mohsen Rezaei. So I think that Mojtahedi is the guy who's running the show. If there's one person who's driving it, it's him. He took over as soon as his predecessor, Pakpur, was killed alongside Khamenei on February 28th. And he had to stabilize the situation. And he is likely the person who drove this idea that Mojtaba Khamenei 9 days later should become the successor to his father. To me, all of this is this clique sort of trying to avoid looking like there is no constitutional setup anymore. Because let's face it, the executive branch led by the president is neither here nor there. They've openly contradicted him many times over, and he just is now, left to drive in his lane, and that lane keeps shrinking. And so there is no constitutional setup in that sense. If there's a supreme leader, we have to see him, and we have to have evidence that he actually wields enough influence. So to me, this is all a fiction to cover up the reality where the Guards need to run this place. There's nobody else, and they can't look like, oh, there's no constitutional setup, because it's illegitimate. At a time when the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic is at an all-time low. And so that is how I look at this picture, this broad picture. As for Hussein Taib, the former head of IRGC Intel, he was the normally heads of intelligence agencies, whether it's MOIS, the Ministry of Intelligence and Security, or whether it's Sipah Itala'at, they are all clerics. And Taib was removed because of that incident with Mohsen Fakhrizadeh. And who is he replaced by? For the first time, the IRGC brought in one of their own, some brigadier general whose name escapes me right now. So to bring this guy back to the Basij means that they needed to have somebody who was loyal to the system, who they think could influence the Basij in a way, which also tells me that there's going to be heavy reliance on the Basij moving forward as as we move beyond this war phase and this decline of the Islamic Republic moves forward. They have to have their ducks in the row to make sure that people don't rise up because of the vacuum that's been created. I'll stop right there, and then we can pick it up later.
So, Kamran, just briefly, based on your assessment, which is fascinating, are you saying that these appointments are very much a distraction from the real question of where is this supreme leader, and supposed to be some sort of evidence, if you will, of, oh, look, he's making these appointments, there's proof of life?
Yeah, I think that that's part of it, but but the bigger issue or the bigger motivation is that the center of gravity are the Guards. And the Guards are not what they were prior to this war that began on February 28th. In fact, we can go back to last June of 2025 when as many as 15 of their top leaders were eliminated. So they have to somehow consolidate what their current de facto control over the system. So this is them doing that, and also being mindful that because they had to deploy the Mosaic doctrine, where you decentralize military operations under a situation of war, that gives agency to other people who didn't necessarily have it in the past. So now there are too many of the Guards. So where is the locus of decision making? And I'm not even getting to the broader ecosystem of the Guards, which includes Rezaei and Ghalibaf and others, Zulqadr and all these people. So I think this is a difficult situation that they're trying to manage. So yes, they want to. It serves as a distraction, but I think it's more about maintaining control.
Jason, what do you think? Do you see this effectively as an IRGC coup? And how do you see the power structure there? Kamran mentioned that Vahidi being on the top. How would you label who is on top and what order? And how could the clash of this new kind of collective leadership that's formed under Ghalibaf, the foreign minister Araghchi, and the president Pezeshkian in relation to all of these IRGC folks now, and who really carries more weight within the Islamic Republic right now?
Yes. Well, I think that ever since Ali Khamenei's death in February of 2026, there's been a diffusion of power within the Islamic Republic, because without an accessible and visible supreme leader, power has become more diffuse among different individuals. So before, you had an accessible and visible supreme leader who was able to hand down a decision that unified the system, and they carried out the order. Now it's a little messier and uncertain. So that is just, I think, how I see it right now. I have a lot of questions on Mojtaba Khamenei. First, whether he's dead or alive. Second, if he's alive, how active he is in decision making. Those remain very significant open questions in my mind. But if you look at some of the recent appointments, I think we have some hints here that the system is trying to thread the needle among different camps within the IRGC to try to hand out different positions to basically allow these different factions to have different aspects of the system under their control. So what I mean by that is we look and see with Ali Abdullahi, who was who named the chief of staff of Iran's armed forces after he served as commander of the Khatam al-Anbiya central headquarters. Ali Abdullahi is actually a longtime deputy of Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf. Ali Abdullahi served as Ghalibaf's deputy commander when he was the head of the IRGC's Air Force. He also served as Ghalibaf's deputy when Ghalibaf was the head of the National Police. So we see Ali Abdullahi being installed in this as chief of staff of Iran's armed forces, and that basically placates the Ghalibaf camp, and he will have a seat on the Supreme National Security Council. So that's an example of the Ghalibaf camp being taken care of in this tranche of appointments. On the other hand, we see Mohsen Rezaei, who, as you noted before, has become secretary of the Supreme National Security Council. He was put out to pasture a long time ago as the secretary of the Expediency Council, and he had been outside the inner decision-making circle of power in the Islamic Republic for decades, and many Iranians, I don't think, saw him as a serious person. He ran several unsuccessful presidential campaigns. He lost a seat in 2000 for parliament. And so he has been on the outside of the decision-making circle in the system for many years. And I think he's been brought back as a way and his he being brought back into the fold reflects how hollowed out a lot of the senior ranks of the IRGC have become. So they've had to rely on the old guard like Mohsen Rezaei, also Mohammad Bagher Zolgadar, who he replaced as Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, and also Mostafa Izzadi, who has become the deputy commander-in-chief of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. And so they've had to rely on these older guard parts of the IRGC. One of the most interesting parts about the appointments announcements that I've noticed has been that right now, there is the commander-in-chief of the IRGC, Ahmad Vahidi, is a major general. That's his rank. He was just promoted to major general. But interestingly, even his deputy commander-in-chief now of the IRGC, Mostafa Izzadi, has the rank of major general. Traditionally, the deputy commander-in-chief of the IRGC has had a brigadier general rank. If we look back to when Ali Fadavi was the deputy commander-in-chief of the IRGC, he had a brigadier general rank. So I think it just shows that they're installing a lot of these old guards into these new posts. And I thought that was noteworthy in the appointment. As it relates to, Mohsen Rezaei, also he has been traditionally more affiliated with conservative political currents in the Islamic Republic. That's how he's run his presidential campaign. So many, I think, saw his anointment as Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council as a way to counter Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf and his circles. So we see Ghalibaf getting Ali Abdullahi, but Mohsen Rezaei becoming Secretary of the Supreme National Security Council on the other hand. And then last and certainly not least, Hossein Tayyab, I thought, as many did, was one of the most interesting announcements. And that's because he lost his position as commander of the IRGC's intelligence organization in 2022 after a series of botched plots and assassination, targeting. Also, there was a lot of internal security failings under his reign as the longtime commander there. But there's also what I have seen an internal power struggle that he was the victim of, in the sense that in Ali Khamenei's office, there was a long-running rivalry between Ali Asghar Mir Hijazi, who was the deputy chief of staff of Ali Khamenei and his intelligence advisor, and Hossein Tayyab. At one point, I think Hossein Tayyab tapped Hijazi's phone. So there was a lot of bad blood there, and that precipitated, in many respects, the ouster of Hossein Tayyab as head of the IRGC's intelligence organization. And Hossein Tayyab was very much affiliated, as Kamran and Omid noted, with Mojtaba Khamenei for many years. He was part of his Habib circle of military security elites that he cultivated over the years. And so that Tayyab's loss was a loss for Mojtaba in terms of influence in 2022. But I think that now we see that rebalancing happening ever since Mojtaba has become supreme leader, with Hossein Tayyab becoming again for the second time commander of the Basij. So he has resurrected himself, and his Hossein Tayyab stock is rising at the same time as Ali Asghar Mir Hijazi's stock is falling, because there have been some public reports that Hijazi had opposed Mojtaba Khamenei's appointment as supreme leader. And so I think that Hijazi is now on the outs right now, and we see Tayyab now, he's on the rise because of his longtime association with Mojtaba Khamenei. So that's kind of just some takeaways that I'll leave it at that.
But Jason, why now?
Well, I think that they want to show that the supreme leader is, quote, active and engaged. How real that is, we don't know. There's not a lot of public evidence, obviously. There's been no audio recording of Mojtaba Khamenei. It's been interesting to me that, he feels comfortable enough, allegedly, to have a 7 or 8 hour meeting with Masoud Pezeshkian, the president of the Islamic Republic, but is too frightened to give an audio recording of his voice. That just raises many questions as to what's going on in there. But we're going to have the system is going to be under a lot of pressure to produce a proof of life of Mojtaba Khamenei as time goes on. And I think that's why we're seeing a lot of the announcements here to show that he's been active and engaged. But it's not going to placate people because they're going to want to see Mojtaba Khamenei, give a speech in person, and that's not going to last long. This appointment slate.
Omid, what do these appointments say about the state of Iran for the people of Iran and the circumstances that they have to live under now? There are a lot of businesses that have been shutting down due to hijab violations. What does this say about the state of repression?
First, I have to say that obviously after the attacks and the killing of political and military leadership, there has been a vacuum within the system. So this is the first step to repair some of those holes within the system. And I think whether Mojtaba is alive or not, I see all the fingerprints of how somebody like Mojtaba would benefit from this arrangement. You don't see any generational transformation within the leadership. The leader who has picked these people has trusted some of the first generation people of the revolution. There is no new people in this group, and it shows also that how the Islamic Republic's core leadership is shrinking. It's shrinking, and the reliance on the people who can they trust. The number is shrinking, and in the Islamic Republic, I would say the main factor to have somebody close to power is not competence, but it's loyalty. And
so they didn't bring any of the younger guards due to trust, is what you're saying.
They brought everybody who is they're loyal to the system, and it's not about competency. It has never been about competency. If it was about competency, Mohsen Rezaei would have never become somebody at the role that he's taking on right now. And for many years he was the head of the Revolutionary Guards with all the mismanagements he was involved with, or when he worked with Hashemi Rafsanjani as the secretary of the Expediency Council for many years. So I would say all the new appointments show a lot of footprints, fingerprints from Mojtaba, or somebody like Mojtaba who wanted to consolidate power on top, and have people like Mohsen Rezaei who are very famous to be obedient to the superiors. He was obedient to Khamenei, he was obedient to Hashemi, and he's a loyal soldier. So it's much better than Zolgad, who has he's an ideologue. He has his own political base. He has his own opinion on things. Want to enforce it at the National Security Council. So I think that the choice of Mojtaba, Mohsen Rezaei, is very interesting. But all these choices, particularly the choice of Taib, shows that the Islamic Republic, many people thought that, for example, they are going to use the nationalism that was created and accumulated during the war to bridge the gap between some parts of the Iranian people and the government. Many Iranians believe that there is a sea of blood between the Iranian people and the government, and particularly after the mass killings in January. But what we are seeing right now is that the government is not trying to mend or to trim or to bridge the gap that exists between the majority of the Iranian people and the government. Their aim is, they still think that they are in a very emergency situation. They are very much in the survival mode. They are not sure whether they are going to survive or not. They are seeing this war as a prolonged war, and it's going to be much longer than many people think. So they know one of the vulnerabilities is the domestic situation. So what they are doing right now is to fasten the seat belts for their loyalists, their base of support, the families of military people, and all those people who have been supporting the regime on the streets over the past few months. not anybody else. So we see that we are seeing an increase in the level of repression, and I think it's going to increase by the day. We are going to see more executions. We're going to see more arrests, more summons. So the government wants to show that they are in control, and that's how they enforce control.
So, Omid, essentially, these appointments are not just about a war, a foreign war, but also about a domestic war against the people of Iran.
Absolutely. They see two fronts for the war that we are in. One is domestic, one is with Israel and the US. And I think if there was no military threat from the US and Israel, the Islamic Republic would have had a very, very hard time to respond to people's expectations, to their demands, and to the current needs they have, because they don't have the resources in the country to respond to those demands. Iranian people are in a position that they are in a tunnel, in a very dark tunnel, and they are not seeing any light at the end of the tunnel. And I think it's a very suffocating situation for the Iranian people. And the government over the past few months, over the past few years, and particularly over the past few months, has shown no sign of wanting to have a shift or to move things around in a way that people see a light at the end of the tunnel. So I think that's why they are very much nervous. They are very much they are not confident about the situation inside the country, and they see what's happening inside the country, the continuation of what's happening outside, and this new arrangement, the new security arrangement, I think reflects on their insecurity and nervousness about the domestic situation, and the fact that the country inside because of the economic situation, because of all the things that are happening, as you said, the destruction that. That the war brought to Iran, they are very worried about an explosion from inside the country at any moment. It might be 2 months from now, 6 months from now, 5 months from now. But I think they see the signs, they see the writing on the wall, and I think that they are arranging their forces based on that.
So these appointments, Omid, in your view, shows anxiety and weakness.
Absolutely. I think they are very worried about what's happening inside the country. Again, they know the numbers. They know their vulnerabilities. They understand if this war and the economic blockade goes on for 6 more months, how much they have in their supermarkets and in their warehouses, and how can they respond to what's happening in the society. There might be a very, very small fraction of the Iranian society that can still live with the current situation. But from what I see and what I hear, the vast majority of the Iranian people are overwhelmed with the inflation, overwhelmed with the lack of opportunities, overwhelmed with the having no hope for the future. And I think this is a very, very fragile situation for any government.
I just wanted to end with a point, Kamran, you made about how these appointments indicate to us, shows us more about who is making these actual appointments and decisions versus the appointments themselves. Omid mentioned that Mojtaba Khamenei's fingerprints are all over this. Do you see anybody else?
Look, I think that we have to understand, the IRGC isn't a monolith, okay? But in an emergency situation, post February 28th, there had to be some people to step in and take over. They had to stabilize the situation. So who decided that Mojtaba is going to take over? I can tell you that I was getting reports that Ali Khomeini, the grandson of Ayatollah Khomeini, and who's married to the granddaughter of Ayatollah Sistani, was supposed to be the successor had all things been equal, meaning that, the idea was that at some point Ali Khamenei would pass away, and they were planning for that. That was my understanding from a variety of sources. Now, Mojtaba Khamenei, is, if you look at it, he's the son of the previous supreme leader. So the system already does not have legitimacy. And now you're introducing the hereditary element. Why are you doing that? And it is because you fear something. So again, I go back to Vahidi. He stepped in as the head of the IRGC. It's not really clear who made him the head of the IRGC. Was it a standing order that, he was deputy to Pakpur and Pakpur got assassinated, so he stepped in and he just got, promoted by default. But let's just say that he became the head of the IRGC wearing the uniform. And so it was on him to mobilize all the regime's assets from various factions, the Ghalibaf faction that Jason talked about, and others, and bring them to the table. So then the question is not who made these appointments so much, but who decided that Mujtaba is the supreme leader. Now, one answer is that the Assembly of Experts, Khobragan, voted him in. To me, that's just pro forma. That's sort of the last, get a vote, you need to vote to make it look legit. But that entity has never served this function. We all know how Ali Khamenei himself became supreme leader upon the death of Khomeini. So there is that, by the book kind of explanation. But in an emergency situation, the first thing that goes out is the rules book. And so someone had to sort of say, hey, we're leaning this way, and then steer everybody else, all the various elements, to say, yes, we want Mujtaba to take over. Now, that's part one. Part two is that he hasn't been seen.
Exactly.
And so he didn't even attend or heard from. And he didn't attend his father's funeral. And so, and it went on for a long time. And so it was a whole week of if you will, events. And so he was absent from that. So I go back to the question of where is the locus of power? Who has the ability to make things happen? And I think that this decision to make Mojtaba Khamenei comes from the Guards. I wrote a piece, a report actually 2 years ago in April of 2024, talking about post-Khamenei Iran. This was before the war began, well before. I had no idea that Ali Khamenei would be assassinated, but I was looking at sort of an orderly, if you will, transition. And I wrote in the report that anybody who succeeds Ali Khamenei, regardless of who that person is, will not have the same stature and will need a powerful center of power to back him up. And that there's only one center of power in the country, it's the Guards. And so
exactly,
you have to assume that everything that we're seeing is being engineered by the Guards and a small clique that enjoys more influence and authority and control than others in the system. So it's like a collective, if you will. So it's not one person. So maybe the one person can be identified as Ahmed Vahidi, who's the CNC of the Guards, but he can't act alone himself either. He needs others in the system. And so I come back to the same point that what we're seeing is everything that's being decided by the Guards, and then it's sort of refracted through the institutional and constitutional mechanisms that, quite frankly, one has to question whether they are actually functional or not.
Yes, definitely. A lot of questions still. Thank you so much to our panelists for the excellent discussion today on Eye for Iran. My colleague Mehdi Sepovan joins us for a piece he recently wrote for our website about the nefarious reason Tehran is tearing up cobblestones. Welcome, Mehdi. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Your report found that Tehran's municipality is tearing up the cobblestones of the capital's historic pedestrian zones and laying asphalt, a change officials call traffic management, but your investigation found something much more. Tell us about that.
So actually what we've had so far in the news is mostly from municipality officials saying that some of the more historic neighborhoods of the capital city of Tehran, they are undergoing changes to rip up the cobblestones that used to lay there and provide sort of pedestrian zone to asphalt surfacing suitable for vehicles. They have given the credit to the police, saying that it was a suggestion from the police to sort of smoothen out the traffic in those areas because of heavy congestion. Well, that's one reason to think about this change. But what I see in this, and the pattern that I've traced in this, is that there's something bigger going on, which has to do with city management, city planning in favor of security tightening, with a history of uprisings in Iran that have been more and more frequent in the past years. And with what also has been going on over the past few weeks and months in different parts of the city, which boiled down to changing the public space, sort of taking away the points, the nodes that could provide a space for people to stop, to socialize, to congregate and form a sort of social life that would then, in the view of the security apparatus of the country, would translate into more unified action and more cooperation when an uprising will come up, which I believe the security force see a big chance that there would be many of in the future.
So they're definitely planning for that more uprising, especially as the threat of war, or maybe the war ends or the threat of war recedes. And this is, per your report, this is happening in District 12, Baharistan Square, and 30 Tier Street. For people who are not familiar with Tehran and its streets, where are those situated in Iran's capital, and why does the location matter when it comes to, like you said, protests and gathering and people congregating against this regime?
So these areas are located mostly in the historic and central parts of Tehran. The uprising in January 2026 started from the bazaar, which is situated in the very heart of this area, the 12th district. The bazaar has historically been a very decisive social congregation and formation when it comes to social uprisings in Iran. And when businessmen in the bazaar feel that they need to take some action in the form of protests in the streets, it's usually the most serious ones in terms of the effect that it would have on the society in general, on the political shifts that it normally creates within society. And it's well known that the 1979 revolution became very serious and very decisive when the bazaar rose up. So this District 12, is home to many businesses, the Grand Bazaar, and much more companies with their offices in there. And also, it also houses many universities and is just adjacent to the University of Tehran, the School of Art, the Amir Kabir University, Khwarazmi University, which are the hot points when it comes to social uprising, with students, always putting out the most the eye-catching scenes in their protests, and being the biggest difficulty for the oppressive regime when they do rise up and they demand change. So this particular area, is about two things: one, businesses, and then students. So they are actually the government, what is doing, I think, is changing the social life that could form in those areas in favor of more control in the future.
So yeah, just break that down a little bit and explain in terms of why asphalt would prevent that. So does that mean that you'd have more traffic from cars, so prevent people from congregating, or if there is an uprising, then the police vehicles and whatnot have an easier time to get through and to start, beating and shooting and killing these protesters?
So it's a combination of all these things. First of all, the cobblestones can be easily, dislodged and used as a projectile by protesters. That's
As weapons, yeah.
Yes,
The French did it, yeah.
Exactly. And that's one thing. But again, when you have a pedestrian zone, it's usually not just the surfacing that is different. It's you usually got bollards on each side of the street, on each end of the street. Stopping traffic. You have benches like here and there throughout the street. You have trees. You get, I don't know, businesses, restaurants. They put their tables out, and that all of that translates into first creating stopping points for people to congregate, and then hiding points for protesters when there is shooting, when there's something like that. And then lastly, and more importantly, for the police and the Basij and all those forces who do come to the streets to shoot people during protests, is that these pedestrian zones severely limit their maneuverability in terms of the motorcades, the special forces, their cars moving down the street. So that is going to create problems for them. And by changing these pedestrian zones into thoroughfares for cars, they are actually paving the way for swift action during protests. They are creating plain sight and direct shooting range for their forces to have an easier time dealing with protests, really.
And your investigation also looked at historical comparisons of how this has been done in other countries in the past. Can you give us a little kind of brief overview?
Yeah, so it has a long history going back to France and the time of Napoleon III, who had someone named Haussmann redesign the city, redesign the streets, in order to take away people's ability to create barricades, and also to hide, and also to put up obstacles on the path for the army when there was an uprising during those the revolution times in there. So Haussmann did vast changes to the city. He demolished all those organic narrow lanes and narrow streets, and built very wide streets with good clean sites, helping cavalcades to move along, to helping the army to deploy forces and ammunition, everything like that. So that has become a classic change when it comes to city planning that favors, the more dictator-like management of, times of uprising and social protests like that. This has found its way into literature. We got the novel Le Miserable, which very beautifully depicts those scenes from old France, from those times. when the revolution was happening. And it has been extensively discussed in social literature as well. Uh, uh, you got Walter Benjamin, who has discussed in his Arcade projects, which is a massive book on city planning. And as he specifically talks about the Haussmannization of cities, which is about the strategic tool that the states have to oppress citizens by changing the shape of city, changing the shapes of streets to take away those special areas that create a moment for pause, a moment for congregation and exchange of ideas, exchange of words of protest in favor of more control. Also, you have this Marxist thinker, David Harvey, who is in his book Rebel Cities, says that citizens have a right to their cities. He says they have a right to inform and have a say about what the city should like and how it should be planned, because by changing their cities, they are ultimately changing themselves and deciding for themselves their society. So how a city looks and how crowds flow in a city is considered by these thinkers as a right for the citizens. And what we're seeing in Iran, and we have seen as discussed in a place like Paris in the time of Napoleon III, is states using city planning against the will of the people.
So yeah, they have that historical precedent. And, I'm so happy you did this story, this investigation, Mehdi, because this is not something that you're going to see on other mainstream media outlets when it comes to Iran. The narrative has always been, the Strait of Hormuz and oil prices. And this is really important. This government is doing for, knowing full well that, we're gearing up for protests and they're ready to essentially kill from every aspect, from who controls the streets, who's making the decisions, to how the streets are being made.
Well, I think this is a very new thing that's happening in Iran. So it's quite new. That's why I chose to write about it and, raise awareness about it. It might not be in like more liberal societies where you got liberal causes determining how cities are managed and how they're planned. But this one, because it's new and because it's not as big as an issue like the Strait of Hormuz or, the Middle East in general and how it would affect the global community in general, naturally you wouldn't see it in like mainstream media around the world. But for people 90 million people who are living in that society, who are seeing and experiencing this kind of planning, they're planning ahead. The government is sure that they are going to be facing more and more protests because they are sure that they are always going to fail these people. And they are going to only meet them by bullets. So this is a very serious matter. It's people's lives, and the government is planning to make it as easy as it can for it to kill people, to discourage people to come out and shout their rights, their needs, with the economy in shatters, with social rights deprived, with all of those hangings that are going on every day. You get a dozen hangings. Why the judiciary? So protests are going to happen, and it is such a big deal that the government has chosen to have plans for it, and it's going to have a huge effect on the lives of Iranians. In the recent months, we have had social niches, local communities, restaurants, pubs, neighborhoods, where people who who find it hard to face the bullets are going through, making little bits of shows of, protests or here and there, appearing without the hijab in certain neighborhoods with restaurants that are more welcoming to them, creating that kind of community where people are not necessarily, concerned with all the oppression about hijab, all about freedom of speech, all of that. So this change is something that has been slowly going on and developing in the streets of Tehran, in the streets of other cities around Iran. And the government has made note of that. That's why before this new thing about changing the street surfacing, they demolished the pedestrian zones that they have in Siatir Street, which you just mentioned. They destroyed the flower vases that were on the pedestrian zone. They shut down the businesses, the restaurants that had become kind of like a gathering point for people, for young girls without hijab. So this social movement has started to kind of find a community for itself with its own geography, with its own economy, businesses in it. And the government has made note of that, and it knows the potential for it to create more unrest, more, to create communication among people, and that is where uprisings start. So it's such a big deal for the Iranian government that it's doing whatever it can to stop it at this very early stage. And of course, it's affecting people who want to live in the city as they wish. It's affecting businesses, restaurants, cafes, which are being shut down. So it's a very big deal to talk about, really. And if we get past this ongoing Strait of Hormuz, everything around, military confrontation, which is between military forces, what remains is really what's affecting people in these days is the forms of social and geographical changes that the government is going to enforce on them and create a city that doesn't look like a living place, but rather than just a passing point for everybody to rush through, go to their home, and shut themselves out from the world.
Well, if you like this episode, you can hit the like button and please leave us a comment. We'd love to know what you think, what you want to see for future episodes, maybe particular themes, topics, future guests that you'd like to see. And don't forget to check out our dedicated English website at iranintl.com/EN. And you can also sign up for our weekly briefing newsletter at iranintl.com/newsletter.